What is up guys, Deadset here. So patch 2.06 came out today. Class sets are easier than ever to find, and while it is a good time to consider what you're going to do once Leather comes out in patch 2.1 this summer, it's also the perfect time, at least for myself, to try out all the wild and crazy builds that you can think of. One such build is the Chems Rebuttal Falling Sword build, and before anyone in your group or your guild says that Falling Sword builds are unoptimized and not worth it, you should put on your Crusader crown and tell them that you are the Lord Commander and you decide what's viable and what isn't. Now let's go over the build. These are the skills I'm using. The majority of the damage will come from Falling Sword with Superheated and Consecration with Shattered Ground, of course working together with the damage over time effect of Akarat's Champion with Firestarter. Your ideal combo would be to activate Akarat's Champion, jump once with Falling Sword on top of your enemies. When you land, activate your Laws of Valor with Frozen in Terror and your Consecration with Shattered Ground, and then, because of Chems Rebuttal unique property, jump with Falling Sword once again. This should kill most champion packs or leave most elite enemies at about a third of their health. All other skills and part of our gear is going to revolve around the idea of having your combo back up as soon as possible. Let's go over the skills one by one. Falling Sword with Superheated is going to be the controversial love child of the build, dealing the respectable 1700% weapon damage and leaving its own 310% damage over time effect to add to the scorching death that is Firestarter. I will not lie, this skill needs to be looked at, particularly in the cooldown department. With an absurd 30-second downtime, most reasonable people will lament the cool animation and just move on. Lowering the cooldown by 10 seconds, either globally or as an addition to Chems Rebuttal unique property, will instantly change this skill from a fun oddity into something actually competitive. Consecration with Shattered Ground is going to be our second damage dealer. As my usual explanation goes, it's an area of effect spell with a twofold effect. First, it adds about 8000 life regeneration while you stand in the circle, which is a nifty bonus in this build's case. And the second effect of Shattered Ground is a fire-based damage over time, once again within the circle. The percentage isn't very impressive by itself, but since it applies the damage over time from Akarat's Champion, it makes short work of any enemy caught within. Akarat's Champion with Firestarter rounds out the heavy damage part of the build, providing you with an amazing damage over time effect that, instead of overwriting itself between hits, actually stacks and builds up into an inferno of damage ticks which leaves only ashes in its wake. Whether this rune is here to stay in its current version remains to be seen, but we have gone through a patch with no changes, so Fire Crusaders of all forms should continue building around it. Let's talk about the exotic skill choices. I've picked a generator, Punish with Roar, and while the damage component of the skill is very much present and synergizes well with the gear, the major reason why this ability is in the setup is to increase our block chance during the downtime of our combo. Hardened Senses in conjunction with Provoke with Hit Me, the Hold Your Ground passive, and the Akarat's Awakening Shield will be used to reset our Falling Sword cooldown as quickly as possible. Provoke with Hit Me is another unusual choice. The Wrath generation component of Provoke is nice, but isn't really needed for the build. The key here is forcing the enemy to attack you and increasing your block chance with the Hit Me rune in the process. For the 4 seconds Provoke is active, it will increase your block chance by 50%, bringing you, with this gear setup at least, very close to the cap. You could achieve perfect block with a Helm of Rule, but I tried it out and it simply does not make a difference to warrant swapping out a Stone of Jordan for a Ring of Royal Grandeur. Finally, Laws of Valor with Frozen in Terror is yet another exotic choice. The increased attack speed for faster ticks is obvious. For the rune choice, however, I did many tests with critical and found out over time that the rather long 5-second crowd control provided by Frozen in Terror outweighs the additional burst from critical. Because this build does damage in circles, with Falling Sword landing zone and Consecration, it will greatly benefit you to include a Frozen in Terror cast in the middle of your combo and force the enemies to stand still in your area of effect. You could also use Shield Glare with Divine Verdict here if you're used to it, but I recommend giving Frozen in Terror a shot. As for passives, Heavenly Strength is self-explanatory for two-handed Crusaders. Hold Your Ground, as I mentioned before, block chance is an important part of minimizing our downtime. Throw that passive in there and don't worry about losing dodge, it's pretty much non-existent for Crusaders anyway. Holy Cause is a straight up 10% damage increase, and regardless of us not doing holy damage to make use of the heal, it's still a solid damage boost. You could slot Renewal here if the complete lack of healing passive worries you. I simply prefer relying on the initial burst and the inevitable downpour of health globes around you, but you can go the tanky way and sustain to a second rotation of the combo. We round passives out with Finery. With 7 sockets across the gear, this passive adds a significant amount of strength. And we're done with the build, now let's go over the gear. You're probably bored of this part, but I must go over it. We are talking Crusader endgame here, so the 6-piece set bonus of Akans is a must-have. I'm using the full 6-piece setup in this demonstration with the helm, chest, shoulders, gloves, pants, and boots. Of course, some additional cooldown reduction will be needed across your gear if you want to make full use of the permanent Akarat champion. I'm using a fire damage Stone of Jordan. Not much to say about this one. SOJ is best in slot for pretty much any endgame spec, varying only by the elemental damage. As for the second ring, I'm using a Unity on myself and my Templar, of course equipped with the Immortality Relic for the unparalleled damage reduction. I must make a note here. If you want to play this setup in Torment 6, then the Unity is required more so than in any other build. While with the Holy Shotgun and Darklight builds, you can reposition to threats anytime, once you pick your Falling Sword landing location, you're stuck with whatever awaits you on the other end. Furthermore, unlike Raft Spender builds, you have to reset cooldowns here. And you do that by putting yourself in danger, forcing enemies to attack you and hoping that you block. For these two reasons, nothing compares to the protection of double Unity. If you are opposed to using this method, but still want to try the build, drop to Torment 5, use a Ring of Royal Grandeur and a Helm of Rule, and you'll have a great time. To finish up the jewelry, I'm using a fire damage Haunt of Vaxo, which I trigger with Frozen in Terror. The Shadow Clones are surprisingly useful, but if you lack the Haunt of Vaxo, it will not break the build by any means. Strong Arms with fire damage are my bracers of choice. This build is cooldown based, so Wrath will never be an issue that you have to remedy with Reaper's Wraps, and since Falling Sword has a knock-up effect, you can boost your subsequent damage over time pretty nicely. Let's get to the fun part, the weapon and offhand. Of course, Cam's Rebuttal, a sword that is both flavor and mechanics wise an inspiration for the build. It basically allows you to cast Falling Sword twice within a single cooldown, resulting in a nice burst, but as I mentioned earlier, I wish it had a bit more to it, like lowering the base cooldown of Falling Sword. Nevertheless, it's a flavorful and very cool looking weapon. For the Offhand, the requirements are very modest, the rarest shield in the game, Akarat's Awakening. With the 2.05 changes to the Rally Rune of Akarat's champion, this shield's effect, a chance to lower your cooldowns when you block an attack, is the only source of additional cooldown reduction for the Crusader class. And that is something that the current state of this build sorely needs. So good luck hunting for it, and I'm crossing fingers for you. The Paragon Points are the usual affair for account set builds, 25% movement speed and the rest in strength in the core section, cooldown reduction and the rest in crit damage and crit chance in offense, all resistance and then armor or life percentage according to your needs in defense, and area damage and life on hit in utility. And that is it. I will not mince words, this build is fun over efficiency compared to the Darklight and Fate of Fel flavors of the month. What this build will give you is a breath of fresh air and cool looking gameplay at the expense of several minutes on top of each rift. It's also, I believe, an investment in the future, as we've seen the Diablo development team giving a hard second look at underappreciated gear pieces and making changes to bring them up to par. And you know what? You jump from the high heavens on top of demons to make them go boom. That's enough for me. If you liked what you saw, I would appreciate your subscription to my channel. Check out my Twitch, talk to me on Twitter and Facebook that I added to the video description below, and I'll see you guys next time.